Hey, what's going on, everybody? I have Connor O'Gara here. He's a senior national columnist for Saturday Down South, covers the SEC, and we're going to talk about Texas A&M heading into spring practice. Connor, what's going on, man?
Yeah, not a whole lot. It's low 80s, beautiful here in sunny Orlando, Florida, man. It's the Sunshine State is the place to be right now. It's when all my friends back in the Midwest are sending me texts like, "Hey, can we come down soon?" And we're getting ready for spring football. It's not a bad time of year. I think it's I think it's kind of nice to be able to kind of settle into some offseason storylines after this year was just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, you've got to be careful a little bit on the weather thing, kind of gloating a little bit
Yep.
to people. I've learned that. I've learned that over the years. But Connor, I've been a fan of your work, and I definitely want to talk about this game. So we're just going to talk a little bit about Texas A&M going into spring practice. They start March 7th, just like Miami. Their spring games a week earlier. But look, the way fans are, Miami, especially Texas A&M, these teams haven't faced each other since '08. Miami fans want to know a little bit about this team. From a national perspective, they seem like an exciting team coming off the 8-4 year, number one recruiting class, early projections, maybe a top five team. And so, yeah, they play at Texas A&M September 17th. So big storylines going into it. I want to start with the quarterback position. Can you talk about that and kind of with where they're at going into spring ball with it?
For my money, it's the most intriguing quarterback battle in all of college football this spring. I cannot wait to see the way that this plays out. It's got a little bit of everything. Jimbo just signed his highest rated quarterback recruit since Jameis Winston. Connor Weigman, this five-star, comes in, number one quarterback recruit in the country and national quarterback of the year, all these different things. And so Jimbo is just giddy about this guy, and he looks like the future at A&M. But in the more immediate future is this battle between Max Johnson, who many people know was a starter at LSU. If you remember the shoe game in the swamp back in 2020, he was the quarterback, had this unbelievable performance as a true freshman, and had probably the most casual 27-6 TD to INT ratio that you'll ever see at this level. But there were questions about kind of his upside, his durability, what he was going to be in Brian Kelly's offense. So that's why he ultimately left LSU for A&M. And then you've got Haynes King, who I said coming into last year was the X factor in the SEC. And what I mean by that is he was a guy who Jimbo was just raving about. And during the recruiting process, we hear about his athleticism. Unbelievable athlete, wins the job out of camp last year, and then has kind of a kind of so-so debut against Kent State. And then the second game of the year, he gets hurt in the first quarter against Colorado. Then we don't see him again. So everybody's kind of wondering, where is this going to go? What's this battle going to look like? Is Jimbo going to favor the guy he favored last year? Or did he get Max Johnson for him to be the guy, for him to be the starter? So now I think A&M is just in a much different place than it was last year when it lost Haynes King and it had to turn to Zach Calzada and really didn't have anyone after that. And that was a big topic of conversation around the bowl game when they couldn't get anybody that wanted to play quarterback, and they could have been in a very LSU-like spot. But yes, this quarterback battle could go in a lot of different ways. And there'll be a lot of people watching that battle throughout spring.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and just kind of remembering Jimbo with what he did at Florida State with Jameis deciding to promote him, make him the starter, believed in him. They could have went, with the veteran guy and Trickett. They could have done it differently. So it's going to be interesting to see how he navigates it. But he's been so good, over the years handling quarterbacks. Let's stay on Haynes a little bit more. Connor, you said you've liked him when he's at his best. What does he bring? And then also kind of where he's at, getting back, and what will be the keys for him in the spring.
Yeah, this was an injury that we thought was going to sideline him for most of the year, but we thought originally that he was going to come back from the broken leg. And instead, they just didn't want to rush him back. And maybe that speaks to the long-term picture of this, because his legs are a big part of his game. And now every time you see a mobile quarterback at Texas A&M, the Johnny Manziel comparisons come. He's not Johnny Manziel. He's not doing some of those things. But even you see some of the flashes, like what we saw against Kent State, where he has this one play where he's scrambling to his right, there's nothing there, and then comes all the way back across to the opposite side of the field to be able to pick up a first down with his legs. That's what he's capable of. He loves working the middle of the field. He's not necessarily going to blow you away with some of these NFL level throws quite yet, but Jimbo's just has been saying that his accuracy continues to develop and he continues to be more comfortable. I think he's a little bit of like a higher upside Kellen Mond. I think that's the comp. I mean, if you look at some of the things he was doing out of high school, he can bust those long runs. If you don't account for him, if you don't have a spy, he can really make you pay. But I'm fascinated because we just kind of scratched the surface and we really haven't seen what that full potential is like. And we know with Jimbo's system, it takes a little bit to be able to get some of these concepts down. Zach Calzada struggled with it when he came in last year, but Haynes King is a guy who has been written off a little bit nationally and was somebody that was getting so much pub and so much attention in the SEC last year. And now I think everybody's kind of waiting to see what this next chapter looks like, and assuming he can make a full return from the injury that he suffered last year.
Connor, you said that you feel like this is the most intriguing quarterback battle, and I think you're saying that not to put words in your mouth, is because the guys are capable. It's not one of these situations where, oh, who are we going to go with? What are we going to do? Kind of thing. It seems like they can kind of go different routes with it. Do you get the sense that quarterback battles are very interesting of when to name a starter? Do you have a sense on when an announcement could come? Is this going to go all the way up until the fall, or up until the opener? What would you guess, or what would you kind of assume?
I'm guessing this isn't coming out until the week of the game. I think Jimbo's going to play this close to the vest. If you remember the way that he played it this past year with Haynes King and Zach Calzada, it kind of became known. I think it was maybe a week before the game or something like that. And then a few years ago where Kellen Mond was in this battle with Nick Starkel. And Nick Starkel was the guy who played better in the last year of the Kevin Sumlin era. And everybody was kind of like, it seems like Starkel's going to be the guy. He kind of showed out in the bowl game and Jimbo was there in attendance for that. And I remember thinking, all right, Starkel's kind of the guy. Kellen Mond looked like he was way in over his head. And then Jimbo names Kellen Mond the starter. And suddenly like Kellen Mond came out and looked way better than what we were expecting. But he plays this very close to the vest. And if you're one of those Miami fans who's going to like tune into the spring game, you're going to see Jimbo talk very highly of all three quarterbacks. That's what he does. Like to the point where you're just like, all right, you can't blame your receiver for this all the time. Like even last year watching the spring game, it got to the point where he's just sitting there blasting Anais Smith. And I'm thinking to myself, that was a really bad throw from Zach Calzada. I don't know why but he does this because he tries to build his quarterbacks up. That's what he's going to continue to do, even though he knows that probably Max Johnson wouldn't up and leave. His brother just signed, #1 tight end recruit in the country, just signed there as well. But you do run the risk, if Haynes King isn't going to be the guy, of him potentially leaving now with these new undergraduate rules. So I would expect Jimbo to have an answer very, very late in the process. I think he's going to play this as down the middle as he can.
And Jimbo's going into year 6, 8 and 9 wins. I apologize, year 5, but 8 and 9 wins each year going into it, and certainly looking for that big vault. If they are a top 5 team, this could be an opportunity for Miami. They've not won on the road against a top 5 team since 2005. Not a lot of opportunities, but they've not done something like that. And certainly the way it looks, I wouldn't expect them to be favored. Looking way ahead to the game in September. You touched on Anais Smith, the receiver. Expand a little bit more on him. What's next for him and his development?
I love me some Anais Smith. One of these hybrid players who is just so fun to watch when he gets the ball in space. And you can do a lot of different things with him. In my opinion, one of the more unique weapons in all of college football. He was that last year. It was kind of a bummer to see the quarterback play suffer because you really didn't get to maximize his abilities. I think he would have been a lot more fun with somebody like Haynes King, who can make things happen when the play breaks down. And I think that's where we're going to see a little bit more of Anais Smith. And, he's a guy that Jimbo will probably put in the slot a decent amount, but now, especially without Jalen Watermeyer, who was the star tight end, who struggled with drops this past year, he'll still likely be one of the first tight ends off the board in the NFL draft. I think we're going to see Anais Smith kind of work the middle of the field a lot, and they want to feature him heavily, a guy who had the option to go to the NFL draft and decided to come back for year 4. And I think is somebody that needs to be used a lot more. They're going to try and get him a ton of looks early on, but he's not even the most dangerous guy in that offense, which is kind of crazy to think about. Devon Achane is someone that if you're doing maybe one of these way too early, and maybe not Heisman flyers or something like that, but like you're doing one of these way too early breakdowns of maybe who could lead the country in rushing, he is somebody to keep in mind. And you might look at his frame and say, all right, he's 5'9", $185, soaking wet. How could he necessarily have the volume? But you look at what he does from an efficiency standpoint, and he's actually shown the ability to be able to kind of be like a heavier workload guy in certain spots, double-digit carries each of his last 6 games of the year. And now they don't have his Isaiah Spiller. Jimbo's backs get a ton of work. And I don't think he's going to get like a Travion Williams level of work if you remember what he did back in 2018. But he's the guy that, man, Devon Achane and Aniyah Smith, that is one of the best 1-2 punches in all of college football. So dangerous. Both guys can do things special in the return game as well. So I think those are 2 guys that if you're Miami, you're drawing up, you're Kevin Steele, you're trying to figure out what your defense is going to look like. You got to be able to shut down those 2 guys.
And we were going to talk about Devin because the way you talked about Aniyah, I was like, well, I mean, if you like him, Achane's, even more of a playmaker, 7 yards a carry, 9 touchdowns last year. The speed is well known for what he does there. He makes big plays. He's going to be someone certainly Miami's going to have to pay attention to. Is there a few other guys on offense, maybe the skill guys, we'll get to the line, but maybe guys that you're curious to see how they do in the spring as they look to make jumps as well?
Caleb Chapman is an interesting one too. Somebody who was really emerging in 2020 and had a huge game against Florida. If you remember that upset that A&M had where Dan Mullen after went viral for the comments about, we're going to pack the swamp afterwards. That was in part because of Caleb Chapman going off and having this unbelievable game. Now he tore his ACL in that game. And so it was kind of a little bit of a slow return for him. And with the quarterback play not really getting to the level where it needed to be, we never really saw him kind of blossom into that guy. But he's someone who is a deep threat. He can stretch the field over the top. They're going to play him out wide. They're going to look to do some more things with him. And then Damon Demas is the guy that they have been hyping up for a little bit. Former 5-star guy, did not play at all as a true freshman, essentially, which is kind of common for the way that Jimbo likes to develop his receivers. And then was a little bit hit or miss last year. I mean, very in and out of the lineup. He'd have some games where you'd think, all right, he's turning the corner. He's about to take over and look like that guy. And then other games where you're like, wait, is he injured? Is he even active? And then you're like, oh, no, he's just not getting involved. But 2 guys who I think A&M fans are really excited for their futures and hopeful that they can sort of kind of take their games to the next level. They're going to need to, in order for this A&M offense to maximize its potential, in order for them to be able to kind of get some of that pressure off of Devon Achane, because he's going to be the top guy, in my opinion, on those defensive scouting reports. And they need to be able to stretch the field better than they did last year.
So as I mentioned, Texas A&M #1 recruiting class in the country 2022, according to the 24/7 Sports composite rankings. They had 7 5-stars, 4 of them have already enrolled. They've got 11 early enrollees. Is there a guy or 2 that you're curious to see how they do in spring ball that maybe they could make an immediate impact or looking to make an immediate impact?
Well, Walter Nolan isn't going to be there for the spring, but he's the guy that everybody is kind of waiting and seeing. Can he be the next guy? Because man, what's hasn't been talked about, and I actually think, like, for the record, I think A&M is overrated coming into the year. Even Billy Lucci, who runs TexAgs, agrees with me on that take, that A&M should not be starting off as the #4 team in the country because of all that they lost on the defensive side. I mean, their defensive line, you're going to watch the NFL draft in a couple of months, and you're going to be like, oh, another A&M defensive lineman. Oh, yep, A&M defensive lineman here. Like, they were so loaded up front. They had the #3 scoring defense in the country. DeMarvin Leal was that dude. And so I kind of wonder now, what do these young A&M defensive linemen look like? They need to be able to get Walter Nolan on the field and looking like that guy that he's been built up to be. There's going to be opportunities for them to be able to kind of take over. And now the question, what does it look like without Mike Elko, who went to Duke, takes the head coaching gig, his first head coaching gig? I talked with Mike Elko about his defensive line this past week and all the different dudes that they had up front. And it was kind of nice because they could just stay on the field the entire time. And so when you're watching A&M this year, that's the big question I have with those guys up front, especially Walter Nolan. Will they be as well conditioned as we saw this past group? Because it's such a blessing to be able to have those guys who you don't necessarily have to rotate in and out. They can play against the run. They can play against the pass, inside, outside, do whatever. But Walter Nolan is the guy that everybody's kind of waiting and seeing. Can he fill the shoes of a DeMarvin Leal, who just meant so much to that program the last few years?
Staying with the defense, DJ Durkin comes over, and just what do you see with the I know you touched on a lot of, especially the defensive line. Damani Richardson's coming back there at safety. Just the defense. What are some kind of keys you think for the spring as we get into it? And maybe it is just the D line there.
Yeah, I want to see how DJ Durkin utilizes Antonio Johnson. Antonio Johnson played at an All-American level this past year, and for those who noticed him and who watched A&M, you saw a special player. And one of the things I was talking to Mike Elko about was he said, when a guy like that can just do so many different things for you, it makes your job so unbelievably easy. And he made us look way smarter than we actually were. And we kept trying to figure out more ways to bring him off the edge, to make him a pass rusher 2 or 3 times a game. We would put him covering the slot receiver. We could put him out wide. We can put him at safety in the box, wherever. He was a Swiss Army knife. Like whatever position he's listed at, just ignore it. He's a football player. He just sees ball, hit ball, cover. He does it all for you. And so I want to see how DJ Durkin utilizes him, if he's going to be similar to an Otis Reese, somebody who used in very different ways at Ole Miss, the defense that he ran the last 2 years. I'm not a big DJ Durkin guy. I did not think that his defense the last 2 years was really good enough to warrant the consideration he got to get a significant pay raise to go to A&M. So I'm a little bit more in wait and see. I've been singing the praises of Mike Elko for a really long time, and I think he's one of the best defensive minds in the sport. So I don't necessarily think we should assume that their defense is going to be ready to go from the jump. Durkin's probably going to try and do some different things. Had an improved defense at Ole Miss, obviously, but that's because their defense was an absolute train wreck in 2020, and they got some key grad transfer additions. So I think that it's going to be a little bit of a different story here, and I don't necessarily think that we should pencil in A&M for a top 20 defense, despite the fact that I like some of the pieces, and I am as big of an Antonio Johnson believer as there is.
You touched on Mike Elko. Definitely, fans, go check out Connor's interview with him. That was great. Duke head coach. A lot to get into, Connor, with Texas A&M. I appreciate your time. Spring ball just right around the corner. I can't believe it's already here. Felt like the season just ended. That's how it works, though. But plenty more to discuss, definitely. But appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely, anytime.